Okay, awesome. Okay, hey everybody, welcome to our first exam review prep. Format of the exam will be just the same as our quizzes have been. So multiple choice, short answer, true or false. The ones there's like multiple answer where you select all that apply, matching, anything like that. And what will happen is we will take our exam a week from today. So hopefully you guys can see this schedule. So today is October 1st. Happy spooky month. And next Tuesday, the 8th, we'll have our exam 1 online. And you guys need to submit it right by midnight, so 11:59 p.m. So what will happen is I will post the exam, and it will be available for you to take anytime between 8 a.m. and midnight, due by midnight. And you will have, say, 2 hours to complete the exam. So you'll have to take it at some point within that day. And it's good that you guys are attending this session because this is great review for you guys and a good opportunity to ask any questions, but it's also a good review for me. And it's also nice to go through, and because oftentimes I will write the exam right after this session. So anything I say, hey, that was important, I'll go on. I'll just like, okay, that's an actual question now. So yeah, and if you have any questions during the session, feel free to just chime in and interrupt me, or you're welcome to type a question in the chat here as well. And then for anyone that cannot be a part of this meeting, this will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube right away. Or if you just want to watch it multiple times, that's okay too. So, do we have any questions right off the bat that anyone's been dying to ask before we get started on the review portion? Okay. Yes. You cannot pause it. That's a good question. Canvas won't let you pause it, unfortunately. So just get to and from the bathroom as quickly as you can. or if your office is stationed in the bathroom, that's also a personal choice. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it should be plenty of time to do the test. And also, I would like to say, this first exam is not going to include everything that we've learned so far. We are just way too far in with content. It's way too much information. So you are only going to be tested on lectures 1 through 5 in the Bricks lab. That's all we're going to be tested on for this first exam. Any content past that point will just be grouped into exam number 2 because it's just too much information and I don't want to do that to you guys. So yeah, so that's what we'll review today. We'll go through lectures 1 through 5 and then the Bricks lab, and then I think you guys should be prepared for next week. And then our following exam 2, will be at the end of this month, probably on Tuesday the 29th. We'll see how it plays out. We have to be flexible in this class because of the grapes and the wine situation. But I have it tentatively scheduled for Tuesday the 29th. I'm not going to make you guys do it in person. I'm certainly not going to make you do it on Halloween. So that wouldn't be a good time. But that's just for now. Potentially that might change. So just because I want to give you guys the grace of being able to take all 4 exams if you want, or not, the option of not taking that last one if you don't want to, if you're happy with your grades. If we just do 3 exams, then you have to do all 3, and one of them is going to be ginormous and overwhelming, and that's just not a good time. So I like to split it up. Okay, any other questions before we hop into it? Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and let's start with lecture number 1. Way back when we very first started this class, Introduction to Wine. Cool. So just kind of words of wisdom for studying for my slides. Any words that are in bold are typically important and can be used as quiz questions. So, I mean, obviously, I don't think wine. I think you guys know how to define wine, so I don't think you have to worry about that. But viticulture, enology, and winemaking could be potential vocabulary questions. It could be a matching question situation. Very straightforward. the difference between, varieties, what's ampelography, what is a clone. This can be tricky sometimes, as in a clone, to create a clone of a vine, like taking cuttings, versus how do new clones come about. I think it's important to know the difference between these two things. So I definitely, put a bookmark on that one. ABA, again, just another good vocabulary question. It could be a matching situation or a true or false question for that one too. I'm not going to ask you to remember what the leading varieties are in California, and I'm not going to ask you about the Winkler Index. That was more for just kind of fun information. Cool versus warm climate wines. I'd put a star on the slide. This is just an overall very general important thing to know. And if you just took the 303 exam, I know a couple of you guys out there did. I'm sure you're ready to answer this question again. I'll be grading those exams tonight. I'm not going to ask you about top wine producers or the economic impact. That was just kind of an overview, or wine production across the world, because these numbers are changing all the time. So as much as I'd like you to memorize these things, it's pointless to memorize something that's changing all the time, because you might not be correct starting, January of 25. I'm not going to ask you about France or Burgundy or Italy or New Zealand. I do think this wine history section would be nice to touch on. So the wine beginnings in Georgia, I think it's important to know about the cradle of wine and the evidence that there is there. And then also the difference between the findings in Georgia versus the findings in Armenia. Georgia shows the earliest wine beginnings in around 6000 BC. And then in Armenia, we have the first evidence of steady wine production as well. So lots of history there. The Phoenicians, here we have some bolded words, amphora, the pithos. What are these? Why are they important? If I feel really fun, I'll ask you who the Greek god of wine was. Another bolded word. And yeah. So this presentation, more for fun, less so much the winemaking portion of the class, just kind of an introduction. So not too much from that presentation. Do you feel good about it so far? Any questions? Okay, beautiful. Okay, winemaking basics featuring the viticulture side of winemaking. So being able to define must versus pumice, those are great winemaking terms. Do we all feel like we understand the process of how a white wine versus a red wine is made, whether it ferments on the skins or fermenting the juice? Okay, awesome. And if you don't, just review these slides. It could be a really good question on the exam where I might say, list the order of how a white wine is made, and I might, you'd have to select the chronological order that those things happen. So it'd be A through, I'd give you a list of A through D, and one would be pick the grapes, press the grapes, crush and destem the grapes, ferment on the skins. And then for making a white wine, some of those obviously do not apply for making a white wine, so you have to put it in chronological order of what would be correct. That would be a good question to ask. Cool. Questions every winemaker should ask themselves. I like putting philosophical questions into exams. You can't really get them wrong, just make sure you answer them. I might ask you a philosophical question about, you suddenly inherit, $1 billion, or you find out you're somehow related to Elon Musk or whatever. I don't know. What are you going to do with this money at the winery? What are some questions you'd ask yourself? So I would just like to hear what you have to say. So just think about the business side of what it takes to run a winery and the things that we should ask ourselves. Cool. This slide has a nice star on it. This is a question I always like to ask. Where does wine flavor come from? So if I ask you this question, this would be a 4-part question where I ask you to list the four places that wine comes from, but also explain. So this would be an 8-point question, and if you had just listed these 4 things, you'd only get half credit for that, because I want you to tell me how. And these are great questions because if you end up working in the industry or talking to someone, these points inevitably come up. Someone could say, hey, I really liked this wine that you made that we tasted, and it tastes like cranberries. Did you put cranberries in the wine? Like, that's a very common question. It's like, no, wine flavor actually comes from these 4 things. And then you can help educate them and to spread that information. But you need to tell them what they are and then explain them to them. So, very good question. Definitely put a big star on that slide. Cool. And then this just kind of goes into each of those components. The grape itself, the activity of microorganisms, processing decisions that could impact the character, and then aging as well. Cool. So definitely make sure you feel comfortable talking about those points. For the viticulture component, it's important to know the difference between Vitis vinifera and then American grape varieties like Vitis labrusca, Riparia, and that is because we have this silly little thing called phylloxera that lives in the soil, so we have to use American rootstocks to protect our vines against them. So that's like the big takeaway of this slide. So if you know that, fantastic. Cool. Do we feel comfortable with the difference between varieties and clones? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, always a great question. You can expect that on the exam. Cool. Characteristics of plants. The plant's first priority is to reproduce, of course, and disperse its seeds. So that way it can reproduce. So fruit is just an agent to spread those seeds. That would be the big takeaway from that slide. Not so much here. Not so much on this slide either. That's more of a 303 question. Types of viticulture practices. I might ask you a small question about this, but I'm not going to focus too much time on this topic because, again, this is more of the winemaking course. Okay, ripening, what's ideal and what's not ideal, right? So we talk about an increase in sugar and a decrease in acid, but also when the flavors come into play. And if the climate conditions are unideal, then your ripening conditions are also unideal too. So maybe prepare to talk about that and understand also like how the fruit ripens and how it develops as well. Cool. Any questions on that lecture? Okay, moving on to harvest decisions. When it is ideal to harvest grapes. So since this is a winemaking class, I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions on style, when to harvest for a wine-specific style. So sparkling wine versus port style or late harvest wines, right? It's pretty straightforward. You harvest those late versus sparkling is early. Sweet wines, ice wine. So, ice wine is sweet because it's harvested when it's frozen. So I'll be asking you a lot of questions about the timing of harvest, how it concentrates sugars, and what style of wine correlates with that. So be prepared to just kind of outline or identify certain parts of those styles of wine. Cool. Berry ripening curve. This is always great. Knowing how many stages there are, what happens in each stage, what happens to the acids, when acids peak, stage 2, what is verasion. You're going to need to know all those things. What happens in stage 3. Don't worry so much about these words on the bottom of the graph. Just knowing, cell division, acids peaking, and all those other components. And then this slide lays out what happens. So if you're not sure, just refer to this slide. And you can also check out this article that I have linked to the slide as well. Cool. So sparkling wine, made in 3 different ways. I might have some true or false or some matching for this one. It is important to know the 3 different ways that it is made. And we talk about that in, I think, the next presentation in more detail. Knowing when this is harvested, what makes the bubbles, and what parts of fermentation. late harvest wines. I'm not gonna ask you about typical varieties. Don't worry about that. Whoop, there goes my little box. But I will ask you about how fermentations are stopped in these processes. So for a late harvest wine, you can arrest your fermentation by temperature and also sterile filtration. Or you can also fortify it as well, right? If you want to make it like a port style. And that alcohol will kill everything in it. Cool. Okay, botrytis, also known as noble rot. I think this is also a very good question. I might ask you how botrytized wine is made, or what conditions can lead to noble rot, or maybe I'll throw a question at you of, you know, you couldn't find a picking crew this year, and you had a grape left out in the vineyard for just way too long. It's already starting to show signs of rot. What would you do to recover this like loss, basically, and how would you make a wine that could profit your business? You could say, I'm going to make a late harvest botrytized wine. I'm going to work with this mold that's on my fruit, and I'm going to make a sweet wine. It comes in smaller bottles. I can sell it for a higher price. Or you could say something like, you could give me something along the lines of, well, I'm going to hit it with a bunch of sulfur, and I'm going to try my best to recover it as a normal standard table white, or whatever creative solution you have in your mind would receive some kind of credit. Just kind of working through the thought process on how you would address that challenging situation. I'd like to see like how you sort that out. Cool. And you can just assume that you have unlimited resources and money in that situation. Yeah, so you could say, I'm going to freeze my tank, even if you don't have a tank that you could afford to freeze. You say, I'm going to freeze the tank and concentrate the sugars even more, or I'm going to do something else. Then that could also be a situation. Cool. Okay, then we have the late harvest Tokai wines, orange wines made with botrytis. I like to ask oftentimes like which types of wines are made with botrytis. So we have Sauternes, the Tokai, and then we also just have late harvest botrytized wines as well. That might be a matching or select all that apply. So just pay attention to where this fungi, places, where it shows up in the wine world. And then we have ice wines, which are harvested when they're frozen, but these are not infected with botrytis. No. Cool. For German white wines, I'm not going to ask you about the sweetness scale. I think that's more just like that's more of a wines of the world question. Okay, sliding scale of berry ripening flavors. If I were to ask you a question about something about style of a wine and when it was harvested, it would be to your benefit to talk about the sliding scale of flavors. So I say, you have a relationship with a local vineyard, and you purchase grapes from them every year, and they decided to drop off 6 tons of fruit on your doorstep this morning, and the Brix is 18 and your pH is 2.9, what are you going to do with this fruit, right? So then you could talk about the sliding scale of flavors. You could talk about sparkling wines and how those are typically harvested early. Again, assume you have unlimited money and resources. Just want to see you put together that thought process, right? Or I could just ask you a very straight up question of explain how the flavors develop in a grape depending on when it is harvested, late or early, right? It could be a straightforward question. They have different types of fruit. Then boiled fruit, not ideal. Flavors imparted from stems. This might be like a multiple choice question. Just remember the characteristics that are imparted. Cool. When to harvest? It might be a good question to ask about what would drive the need to pick fruit besides its compositional factors, right? And so non-berry factors would be, is it going to rain? Do I have labor available? Do I have enough space? So sometimes we pick fruit on a larger scale, what's not ideal, and there are other reasons for that. Or PG&E told me they're going to shut off my power tomorrow, so I have to process everything now. You know, it could be something like that. So just understanding how that happens and being able to list that would be good. Cool. Berry sampling. Even though we're only going to talk about the bricks lab, we do talk about compositional factors here in this presentation. So just what would be on these slides is all you'd be quizzed on. So bricks, right? We know about bricks. We know that it's important that a fermentation completes, otherwise we could have a stuck fermentation, which could lead to spoilage. Being able to define residual sugar would be important. pH, the most important thing to take away is that it determines microbial activity and it helps to preserve the wines, and it has to do with the health and the chemical conditions, the health of the wine. So that's why we measure pH, of course. And then there's probably going to be a tricky question in there along the lines of a solution with higher acid content would have a lower pH value, right? So just understanding the difference between high acid means low pH and high pH means low acid. So I know it gets confusing, so that's why it'll definitely be on the quiz or the exam. So making sure you have that squared away and you read the question carefully before just clicking. Cool. Titratable acidity, also known as total acidity. The big thing to take away from the slide, it's a sensory analysis. It's a sensory measurement. It's the amount of acid you can taste in the wine or in the juice. So it contributes to the sensory component. And then also knowing the extremes of that, wines with too low are going to be flabby, and wines that are too high are going to be really sour. Excuse me. Okay, any questions from that? Oh. Okay, nice. Just chugging along. Okay, intro to winemaking. Yay! What is wine? So this, again, just going over the different ways that wine can be made, right? It would be very beneficial to know the different ways that rosé can be made, right? So it can be made in a couple different ways. You can take red grapes, you can crush them and leave them on the skins for a certain amount of time to extract some color, press it, remove the skins, then ferment the juice. You can also take a white wine and blend some red with it. And there's actually also, I guess technically-ish, like a 1.5 step or a 1.5, where we do the saignée, right? Where we bleed off the juice from the tank, and then that becomes a rosé on the side, and then you have a concentrated red as well. So it could also be an answer. Cool. Basic steps for making a red wine. You guys are in the process of this personally, which is great. Any questions on harvesting and measuring these values? I feel like we have a good feel for sugar content, acid content, and pH. Okay, knowing the difference between maceration and must. Great vocabulary words. Primary fermentation, the difference between pumping over and punching down, and why we do these things. That'll be important. Pumice, another vocabulary term. It's important to know. Malolac. Yes, Michael. Oh, there's some repeat slides in here. Both. I'd say both. Yeah, so typically in my experience, extended maceration has been when the grape must reaches 0 or the Brix reaches 0 or negative Brix level, and you can safely press it at this point, but you choose not to. So that would be an extended maceration. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Ken. Okay, promise. Okay, malolactic fermentation, the conversion of two acids is actually a deacidification. So the conversion of malic to lactic acid. So I would ask you to know that. And then carbon dioxide is released in the process. They are, they were overfilled and inoculated, and now they are just spewing out foam. So during the malolactic fermentation, it's important that you leave some head space, because the bacteria will create foam and create excitement, and they can just boil over. Yeah. Yes. Okay, cool. So yeah, it's a decarboxylation reaction. It is highlighted and bolded, so definitely know that. And it's the release of a carboxylic acid. That's what's happening. So you're taking one compound with two acid groups and turning it into the single compound with a single acid group. So I think being able to just identify decarboxylation reaction, I will not ask you to spell that. That will be a multiple choice or true or false. And knowing that it goes from a harsh acid to a creamy acid, being able to explain that would be the most important takeaway from this. Cool. And then malolactic fermentation, what does it do to white wines? It makes them buttery. So that buttery Chardonnay, butter popcorn component comes from that fermentation specifically. Okay, then we have racking, lees, great vocabulary term. It's the lees, knees. All of the sediment and gunk that's left over after fermentation that needs to be cleaned out at some point. The winemaker can choose when to clean that. Some winemakers leave their wine on the lees for a very long time. Some clean it right away or rack it right away. Cool. Rosés and white wines. Do we feel good about the process of these? Any questions about Saunier? That will be a fun one. It's always a good one to talk about. I mean, yeah, if you are going to ferment it on the side for consumption, then yes. I'd say yes. Yeah, any act of draining off from a red tank and saving it would be Saunier. Yeah. Cool. So this could be another problem-solving question where I say to you guys, hey, we have a Pinot Noir that was overcropped and very light, and it's having a hard time establishing color in its skins. What would you do to concentrate the color and flavors in this wine, and what would you do to try to save this wine? And you could say, I'm going to do a Saunier. You could say, I'm going to try doing extended maceration. I would then maybe look into blending and see if I could boost the color from the wine there. So any type of thought process, problem solving would be a great answer for that situation. Cool. Okay, and then the different ways that sparkling wine is made. It will be important to know these three. So you have your ancestral method, also known as pet nat, the traditional method, which is also known as method champenoise, and then the tank method, which is also known as charmat. Pet nat is a very ancient style of winemaking. Some of it's fermented in the tank, and then it gets fermented in the bottle. The rest of the way, it is effervescent, but not as effervescent as a traditional method. Knowing the difference between definitions of a cuvee and a tirage and a dosage will be important. More vocab: riddling, disgorgement, and then we get dosage, the final sugar concentration. Cool. This was a mean question on a quiz. I know a lot of people got confused. It was identifying the sweetness levels, but instead I asked you to do it from sweetest to driest instead of driest to sweetest. So it was very confusing for a lot of folks. You can expect something similar. So just make sure that you're reading the questions carefully before answering them. I might just give you like 3 of these out of the list and then just ask you to order them either from sweetest to driest or driest to sweetest. Either way. Cool. Tank method, pretty straightforward. And then we have late harvest wines. We talked about this a little bit. Yeah, these are like the exact same slides as earlier. Cool. Any questions on that? Okay. Must pretreatments. Okay, again, a little more vocabulary. We feel good about the difference between a cold soak and extended maceration. Yes. Okay. Okay, cluster and berry sorting. The last line of defense before wine is made for quality control, the grapes. Mog, material other than grapes. You could talk about leaves, lizards, spiders, all sorts of fun things. Understanding why we sort fruit, why it's important, and also how it's done. I guess the 3 different ways. Crusher stemmers, why we use them. Whole berries versus crushed berries. How do we feel about carbonic maceration? We didn't talk about it much in person, but I think it was in the video. Do you feel good about it? It depends on the winery. I've worked at places where it was very much the routine. We would look at the berries as they're coming out of the crusher destemmers, and because you can adjust the rate of crushing on a lot of these devices. Not ours, unfortunately. At least not that I'm aware of. It might be. I'll look into it. But for some wineries, yes, and for some wineries, no. I think it's just a matter of winemaker preference. But carbonic maceration is a very big buzz with wineries, and if you know what that is, they'll be very impressed. But it's kind of like it's an exciting thing that wineries are implementing for certain styles of wine, like Pinot Noir. Obviously, like Beaujolais Nouveau is a classic example of that, to help enhance the fruitiness of their wines. Are you thinking like alcohol or? So it will ferment on its own from the inside out, and then you'll get to extract that during the pressing stage. Yes, good point. Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and most industrial presses are. But yeah, our press here at the college is not that efficient. Okay. Cool. Different types of presses. You guys did a very good job with this on the quiz. I don't think anyone had any missed answers on this. So I'm not gonna ask you about the different types of presses, but I will. I might have a question about free run juice. Free run is considered the highest quality of juice. Press fractions can give you, like, it gives you less yield, right? Because most of it comes out from free run, and you get a significant amount from the first press fraction, and then a little bit less every time. But I might ask you about the quality of juice and maybe why you'd want to separate that or not. And then pumice, another great vocabulary term there. Cool. Yes. No worries. Yes. It's okay. Right. Yeah. The stable numbers is going to be super important if you have like a lot of raisoning, as you've already discovered. It's a good way to extract color without extracting bitterness or tannins, because the tannins are going to come out once the alcohol starts to form. It starts to extract the harsher components of the skins. But there's been cold soak is a double-edged sword, because it's beautiful and that it starts to extract all this color before your fermentation has even begun, but it also puts your fermentation at risk. If you can't control the temperature of the fruit, of the must, then you could have spoilage. You could start a native fermentation and you could develop all this VA and all this problem. So I have actually had this problem firsthand when I worked at a larger winery, a very large winery in Amador County, and the fruit came in really hot, and we were dumping in dry ice and chilling the tank, hoping that we could get the temperature down, but it was just so much fruit in such a large tank, and it was so hot, we couldn't chill it enough, so it started fermenting on its own, even though we tried doing a cold soak. So we ended up spoiling the whole lot because we couldn't fight the heat. So that's where it gets kind of tricky. And then there's been research on cold soak about no more than like 2 days is really worth it. It's just decreasing returns at that point. So it's a helpful option that winemakers have, but you do have to be careful. I would never recommend cold soaking for more than 3 days. You're gonna be risking a lot at that point. Yeah, no problem. Mm-hmm. I don't think so. No. Yes. Yes, unless you feel comfortable that the native yeast and bacteria are not spoilage in your winery. If you like, because some people do native fermentations and they make some amazing wines, but I actually took one of the bins in our class, and I'm doing my own little personal project. I'm doing a native fermentation, so you guys can just see what happens for fun. Um, that'll be interesting. But yeah, so once the native yeast and bacteria start to, populate and thrive and flourish, and then you add your industrial yeast or bacteria to it, the industrial stuff is definitely designed and like bred to outcompete the native stuff. It's much more resilient to acid, to higher alcohol levels. It'll ferment faster. But yeah, the sooner that you can throw that in to outcompete it, the better, because they do start to peter off, but they're still producing those negative compounds, and you don't want to have a wine with like high VA or any type of other faults to it. So the sooner the better. But if you feel like it's a good yeast or bacteria, it could add complexity to your wine. So yes. Or any brewing equipment either. Wine and beer, keep them apart for sure. Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to ask you guys about cylindrical versus screw press. I think you guys have a really good hang on that. I do. I'm not going to ask you about pressing aids either. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, is it going to impact, like, the other sensory parts of the line? Um, I haven't had any experience with it stripping anything. I haven't heard any criticism of it stripping anything. It's more of an agent to deconstruct the pectin itself. So it's not adding any flavors. It's not removing any. It's just there. It's a enzyme. So it's like a definition of an enzyme would be great in my head right now. But yeah, it's. Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. But pectin itself doesn't hold any aromatics. It's just keeping the juice away from being used for fermentation. So the components that will give the juice flavors and aromas will be the yeast that you decide, and then the fermentation products taken from there on. But as far as I know, pectic enzyme does not strip any components out of a juice. Yeah, just helps to break it up. Yeah. Cool. Okay, mustard grape freezing. This is kind of another tool you could put in your belt again if you had a theoretical question and you had unlimited resources and money. Freezing to burst the skin cells of the berry to help extract more flavors potentially. Using dry ice to prevent oxidation in your tank. Yeah, expensive procedure, but we'll live in an imaginary world on the exam. Cool. Cryo extraction, cryo concentration. Like I said, if you had unlimited resources, you could freeze a tank to help increase sugar content. This is actually kind of a fun concept. I might ask you what the process is here. And that's because water freezes before sugar does, right? So the water will be the solid brick left behind, and what's left is the sugar content or highly concentrated sugar solution in the tank. So that would be a good question. Withering of grape berries. Another great tool to have your belt, something you could do in a theoretical situation. And then, yeah, here's the benefits of a cold soak. Minimizes bitterness. It's low acid. Can help extract the colors and can bring out some of the beneficial aromas and flavors as well. Cool. I'm not going to ask you to compare cold soak to a regular fermentation. I'm not going to ask you to explain any of that data that was presented. Cold soaking. I might ask you what thermovinification is and why it could help a fermentation. I think that's a good one to remember. Not it's very high end like protected regions do have requirements on what you can and cannot do, but I don't know if these specific examples apply to that. I think I'd have to do some research, but I know that there's regulations on the tonnage that the fruit is harvested at, like what you can produce on your vineyard, right? There's regulations on the amount of residual sugar, the types of oak that you use, how long you age. the alcohol that wine can be a certain range in, and then even in some places there's even like a tasting panel that the wine has to go through before it reaches that certification or before it can even be bottled. But I haven't heard of any specific regulation on this, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So I'd have to look into it. It's a good question. I don't see it being a problem, but I could be wrong. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 Got you. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Joey, he might be able to give some perspective about what it's like from wines from Georgia, for sure. But I know every country, of course, is going to be a little bit different on what they're super strict about. I actually have a cousin in Germany. I could ask who I have a very distant family winery out there. And she said one of the struggles that they had during the pandemic was they couldn't bottle any wine because the wine had to go through a panel of judges before it could be bottled and sold under their region. And because no one was meeting in person during the pandemic, during a certain time, that they couldn't bottle any wine for like a year. And it was like devastating to the business. It was crazy. Yeah. But yeah, you can ask. Yeah. No, unfortunately not. Would be a good $1 million idea though. I like it. Okay. So consequences of thermovinification. I'm not gonna ask you anything about the consequences. I'm just gonna ask about all of the positives. So if you had this would be a good option for that fruit that came in that was covered in mold and mildew, right? If you wanted to use thermovinification to just kill all of the yeast and bacteria that are and enzymes that are on that fruit before fermenting, this could be a very good response to that. Also, a really good thing of thermovinification is you basically cook, like superheat the skins and everything, and then you can press it, and then you can just ferment it in a regular tank. You don't have to worry about digging out any fruit afterwards, which could be cool. I'm not going to ask you about sensory changes. You've talked about Sonier. And yeah, okay. Do you feel good about that? Okay, let's move on to the bricks lab. So bricks, we did a couple calculations in this lab, I believe. I will ask you to calculate potential alcohol, and I will supply you with the formula. So it should be straightforward. And then I might ask you to discover what the initial bricks of a wine is. So you just do the opposites. Instead of multiplying by 0.6, you divide by 0.6. So just plug it into the formula, and you would be good to go. It's important to know that pure water is 0 bricks. And then also, we answered this question during the lab, what would create a negative brick solution? It's alcohol, because alcohol is less dense than water. So that would be important. I will definitely be asking you to do a calculation to create a brick solution. You can assume 100 milliliters. I'm not going to ask you to do a 1.5 gallon or anything crazy. I just want to make sure you know how to do this calculation. So if you need to calibrate your own equipment at home, you know how to do that. So I might ask you to calculate a 2 brick solution, a 13.5 brick solution, etc. And I will say assume 100 milliliters total for your volume. Cool. Grape sampling. Nah, I'm not going to ask you about that. What causes sugar variation in grape clusters? This is a good slide. I put a star on this. I would like for you to know why There is variation with clusters. And if you're in my 303 class and you just manage to say some things that we learned in 303 in this answer, I'm not gonna dock you credits. Correct answers are correct answers. So if you get some of the things confused from the courses, that's okay, because we do talk about this a lot in 303. Seed maturity is an important one. I might ask you about seeds. It's important to know why that is a marker of maturity and what to look for. Cool. For refraction, I might ask you a question about a true or false. This would be a great true or false question. The higher the concentration of sucrose, the more or less refraction is observed. So that'd be a good true or false. So make sure you know how that works. And then also pocket refractometers, are not accurate when measuring fermenting juices. So that's important to know. I'm not going to ask you to tell me how to use it. You guys have demonstrated you know how to use it in class. But I might ask you how to calibrate it. That's important. I'm not going to ask you about digital refractometers. There's nothing to say about that. I might ask you about hydrometers, when to use those. It's important so you can use those during fermentation, right? It's also important to know what can affect your measurement, right? So bubbles, any chunks. If your hydrometer is stuck in the tube, if it can't float freely, that's a problem, right? And temperature, we'll have to adjust temperature based off of bricks. And I'm trying to remember, did we do any, we did some calculations for this in lab, right? Adjusting the bricks. Okay. If that is on the exam, I will supply you with the table. But this table is very difficult to read, especially on a screen, so I'm probably not going to do that. Let's just say I'm not going to do that. Let's just put that out there. Okay. Okay, so that's lecture 1 through 5 in the Bricks lab. Are we feeling decent about things? Hopefully not overwhelmed. Right, yeah, good question. So that will be done online a week from today. Sorry, this is super tiny. Cool. So yeah, so today was our prep, and then a week from today, Tuesday the 8th, online, we'll have the exam. It'll be in the same format as the quizzes were. So once you open it up, the timer starts, and you'll have 2 hours to complete the quiz. It'll be 100 points. And it will be open between the hours of 8 a.m. and midnight. So at some point on next Tuesday, you could take the exam. That would be great. Yeah. And that's how all the exams will be in this course. Yeah. No problem. Yep, and like I said, I'm going to post this to YouTube, so if anyone wants to rewatch this for study purposes, I watch it as I'm writing the exam, so hint, hint, it's a great study tool. And yeah, if you have any questions, I will be seeing you guys on Thursday. If your wines are ready to press and you took them home, please bring them in, because we'll do a mass pressing of all of those, and I have bacteria for all of you. If you have your own bacteria that you want to use, that's fine. But otherwise, I'll be ready for you guys all on Thursday. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording as of right now.